Well, I'm back with Liz and Caitlin and Alan. And the big story today is child porn on Pornhub, but we have a lot of other stories, starting with Caitlin with Freddie Mac.
Yes, we're going to start off with Freddie Mac as soon as I get my window fixed up there. Okay, so what's going on? So there's an article on housingwire.com by, let's see, Georgia Cromray, talking about how Freddie Mac, as well as, I guess, Fannie Mae, I guess it's kind of the same thing. I don't know how these work, had a coding issue. And this coding issue affected 12% of credit reports going out within a 3-week period. And this is really bad because that meant that a lot of people, for example, were denied loans based on their credit score. And they were also, having to, and when they were taking out loans, they end up having to pay more for their loan than they would have had to otherwise. And this is probably one of the most serious coding errors I've ever heard of. Just due to the consequences. So a lot of people's lives are significantly impacted. And this went on for 3 weeks without anyone noticing. And it's not clear like how many loans were affected, but it was at least like up to like 12% of credit reports that were sent out were affected by this. And so, yeah, I mean, credit scores are so weird. They're not very transparent. And they're this magical number that like everyone's sort of credit relies on, everyone's financial health, relies on, and it's a complete mystery. And I'll give you a good example of why credit scores are absolutely ridiculous. So I've recently, got some new jobs. I'm making more money. And I remember I went out and this was a few months ago, and I used my credit card to buy some, of course, radio equipment, because what else would you do with all this money? And it was expensive radio equipment, like over $1,000, but whatever, that's fine. That's fine. This is for my education. It's an investment. It's cool. And I used my credit card, and then I paid it off completely when the next month came. And I noticed there was a good hit to my credit score, like 10 points. Why? Because they're like, oh, you're using more money now. Money that I had, money that I spent legitimately, but it still negatively affected my credit score. And ever since I've been like, yeah, no, I'm not going to use my credit card anymore for like anything, despite the fact that I have the money. I always pay off my credit card in full, not just what's owed, but the entire balance every month.
And the especially crazy part about that is that it doesn't tend to rebound the same amount of points that it dropped after you paid it off. It doesn't go back up as many. It's like if you say you took a 20-point hit, you might get a 15-point rebound once you pay off the $1,000.
Well, figure this one. I rented a car 2 weeks ago in Texas, and the car broke down, and thrifty emergency people are not picking it up. They're ignoring all my complaints. I turned them into the Better Business Bureau. They still have picked up the car, and they're claiming I still have the car when I don't. But they've been charging me $69 a day on a credit card I almost never use. So after about a week of that, they increased my credit limit by a factor of 4. Wow.
All you have to see, all you got to do is steal a rental car
apparently
to raise your credit. Because doing things like paying off a car loan or paying off a mortgage will actually cause your credit score to drop.
Now, to be fair, I imagine what they really want to know is what is the odds of you running a balance and starting to pay interest, because that's when they really get their claws in you, and that's when they really like it. And as soon as you do fall behind, they will, of course, want to encourage you to fall much further behind, so you'll never catch up, so you'll pay tons of interest.
Right. But like I said, in my case, I paid everything off in full. I never accrued any. Yeah, I'm absolutely worthless to these credit card people. And they dock me for it because I'm so responsible.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the absolute. It is ridiculous how these credit scores work, and yet our entire financial system is reliant on it, and they're reliant on a few companies.
Yeah.
to come up with these scores. And as we've seen, these companies are quite flawed and do make serious mistakes on these credit scores that affect people's financial health and lives. So
It's almost as if capitalism isn't as great as we hoped.
this isn't even a problem with capitalism. It's a problem with our credit industry.
Yeah.
Which
and-
could be, go on.
And it's not just the financial. I mean, it's a very real problem for a contributor to homelessness because, so much of the time now your credit score is tied to whether you're able to even rent a place or not even just get a mortgage, but if you have a poor credit score in a lot of places, you're out of luck on even just renting a cheap apartment.
Yeah.
And jobs will check your credit score during the pre-employment process, which is just crazy. I mean, the implications are really endless.
I think it's the closest to China's social value score, social credit, or whatever they call it over there. All right.
Yeah, so I'm going to I'm probably going to upset some people because I know that my score is pretty high compared to a lot of people, but I've never missed a payment. I have always, I have credit, I use credit, but I always pay it off. I'm very good about, there's nothing on my record that would dock any points in the entire history of my credit line. It seems to hover around a little under 800, which is, I mean, like I said, I'm going to piss people off because that is a really good score. But
if you want to make it go up, just leave like a $30 balance on your credit card for a month or two and pay a couple dollars in interest. It'll probably go way up.
Yeah, no. Let's see. I've on-time payments 100%. Oldest credit line is 22 years. Credit used 1%. No new accounts. No recent inquiries. A ton of credit, and it does not go above 800. Getting to that mythical 850. I don't know.
The other thing is you can be a victim of fraud, and that can cause your credit score to drop. My dad has a worse credit score than I did, a few years back when I didn't even have any credit and I was just starting to build it because I just never used the system before. So that can really screw you over, like not having a credit score. If you make it into your 30s and you haven't been using the system, people think, oh, there's something wrong with you. So I would get my credit pulled and kind of almost treated like a criminal because I wasn't in the system. But then my dad was the victim of of credit card fraud where the criminal had basically used like 20 grand on a credit card to buy like gold bars. And the whole thing, I mean, it was easy to prove. They even had the bank and the account number and everything else to the person, but it took forever to resolve, and it caused somebody who has never been laid on a debt in his life, has paid off mortgages and everything else, to have a poor credit score. And he didn't even notice because he doesn't use it. It doesn't really, it's completely immaterial to him. Like, he has paid off vehicles and homes and stuff, but it's crazy how something like that can affect you out of the blue.
Yeah.
All right. So luckily, this is going to show you what a scam this all is. So like I said, I am the model credit card holder, super responsible. They have some suggestions to how to improve my score. So let's look over them right now. One, the most impactful, have more accounts. So they want me to open more unneeded credit accounts to improve my credit score. What? What? That's the exact opposite of being a responsible credit owner. I have as much credit as I possibly need. I don't have enough accounts with high credit limits. Why do I need high credit limits if I if I don't use much credit. I usually just pay with cash because it's why would I need that?
Oh, and plus, you haven't bought a car that you couldn't afford to buy outright, because that figures in. They want you to have installment payments, whether that's student debt or auto loan or home loan.
Yes, thank you. Third most, you need more accounts. There's more accounts again. They just want more accounts with no missed payments. So 100% of my accounts have no missed payments. They just want me to have more accounts.
Well, to be fair, the purpose of a credit report is usually to buy a house. And so the question is it wise to give you a lot more credit? And therefore, how much current credit you have would seem to be irrelevant.
I mean, I would never use it though. I mean, I have a 22-year history of paying everything off on time. I have 100% rate. I have no debt. I know, like I said, this is going to piss a lot of people off that are in worse situations than me, but I'm just showing you how impossible this is. Even if you're in a perfect situation, getting to 850 is just, they're not going to let you do it. So like I said, 100% online, 100% payments. I mean, I'm not that old to have a super old credit line. Credit used 1%, excellent. Like I don't use a lot of my credits.
And the other thing is you can take a hit if you close any of those accounts. So I had this like clothing store card that was the first one that I got, and it was the only one I could get because I didn't have a credit score. And I was during the pandemic, nobody's buying clothes. Well, yeah, I mean, you buy some sweatpants, and that's about it. It's about good for the next couple of years because you're not going anywhere. So they just, without warning, if you hadn't used the credit card in X number of months or a year, they closed it without warning. Well, that caused my score to drop precipitously. So if you close these accounts that you're not using, that can also cause it to drop. I mean, it went down like 60 something points.
So the fourth most impactful one, I think, is the best one that they suggest for me. They suggest the balance on my loans is high compared to how much I initially borrowed on my credit limit. What loan? I don't have any loans.
So they've taken zero and divided it by zero and got a large number.
I assume so. Yes. So anyways, this should just show you how much of a scam these credit scores are. And they're dependent on everything. Like Liz said, getting a house, getting a job. Like I said, a lot of people would kill for my score. I should have a higher score. They won't even let me do that unless I do stuff that's patently irresponsible, to be honest. So,
well, there you go. That's what they're looking for then. In China, they would make it clear what you should do to improve your score.
They do make it clear. They want me to take out more credit.
Oh, there you go.
They don't need.
So,
and they need me to pay off my loans, which I don't have.
Well,
I have 100% low payment, and I owe $0 in loans, and I need to pay off more loans. So you see, this is the problem.
So it's your own fault for not doing what you're told.
Yes.
All right. Well, cryptocurrency. If you're tired of the regular system being madness, the cryptocurrency, of course, always rushes in to be even worse. So this came out. A developer, the Macaleno brothers, decided to create a crypto thing on Solana called the Saber Protocol, but they decided that wasn't good enough. What they did was they rate the success of a new crypto venture by total value invested. And so what they did was they made a chain of about 7 different cryptocurrency projects. The first one would feed into the second one, would feed into the third one, and the next. They created 11 false identities online. So the same 1 or 2 developers appeared to be 11 independent developers. They staged fake arguments on social networks and conversations. And then they were able to claim the same money as it passed through 7 different projects and make it look like an enormous amount of money had been invested. And then they would have fake arguments and fake transfers of money between one account and another to make it look like a whole thriving ecosystem. And this pumped up Solana, and they kept it up for about a year and had a hugely successful project with a ton of money. And then the guy decided to write a blog post confessing to it all, saying, since it'll come out anyway, and then he didn't publish it, but somehow it leaked. So now the whole story is out. And the interesting thing is there don't appear to be any prosecutions or any crime here. In fact, he's still thriving and probably starting a new project. So it's pretty much madness, as you'd expect, which is the problem with the unregulated crypto industry. Most of the trades are fake. Most of the projects are fake. Most of the developers are fake. And the numbers you see in the exchanges are mostly manipulated and fake. Anyway, Tinder has been losing money as the tech downturn, so they have canceled their plans to move into virtual currency and the metaverse and lost their CEO. Ethereum is coming to the merge when they're going to give up proof of work and move to proof of stake. So Ethereum name registrations are going way up. I see a lot of these people on Twitter with their name.eth. I should look into it and see if it's worth getting one of those. I don't know what the benefit or how much it costs is, but I think the main purpose is if you trade NFTs, this domain helps you trade NFTs better. And Solana has another big exploit. A bunch of people are having money drained from their crypto wallets and nobody understands why. And Solana can't figure out why. The current theory, based on evidence they have not made public, is that this is not a defect in the Solana blockchain. It's a defect in an Apple wallet, they claim, which has somehow been leaking private keys to a cloud server where people can steal it. But this is all pretty speculative. The recommendations I've heard from experts is that the way to be safe is to move your stuff into a cold wallet, which is probably a good plan. And I've got instructions on my webpage. You can make a cold wallet with as little as a piece of paper. All you need to do is make an account where the private key is not on a computer anywhere. And the last one I thought was great. A Texas Bitcoin miner, many miners moved to Texas when they got kicked out of China and such. A Texas Bitcoin miner just made more money by not mining Bitcoin than mining Bitcoin, because they made a deal with the electric power grid in Texas to turn it off when the power grid was stressed, and they earned credits in power that way, which ended up being worth more than the Bitcoin they mined. So this reminds me of the stories from my youth when farm subsidies came out and farmers would make more money by not growing crops than they would have previously by actually growing crops and selling them. So that's the crypto ecosystem. And let's go on to Liz, who has cops surveillance technology.
Yeah, so this was a pretty interesting article in Engadget about San Diego restricting the use of surveillance technology for law enforcement. And I was a little confused at first because in the first paragraph, they refer to things like body and street light cameras. And I was like thinking, well, you want the police to have body cameras, right? Well, no, they were talking about AI recognition systems, which is good. I think that, the widespread deployment of those systems is kind of scary in a lot of ways. And there is a big push to implement more of those in this country, which I think is pretty wild because, again, much like we were just talking about China's social credit system, those surveillance systems are ubiquitous in China and other fairly totalitarian regimes. So it's good that they are putting a pause on this, and it surprised me a little bit because San Diego is historically pretty, it's got a very heavy military presence. There's a lot more conservative politics at play in that area. Even though California is a blue state, there are really heavy red pockets, and that's historically been one of them. So it's good to see that they're kind of joining other cities like San Francisco to restrict that technology, and in instances where they're not outright restricting it, at least be a little bit more transparent about what they're implementing and why.
Yeah. All right. And Alan's got monkeypox.
Yes, monkeypox, it's a real thing now. The city declared an emergency, then the state declared an emergency, and now the federal government has declared an emergency, monkeypox emergency, that is. And that means that the public health efforts up to this point have not been working. We have community spread, and even though the number of documented cases is in the thousands, that's nationwide, that's almost certainly an undercount. And as we've seen previously with COVID, the health surveillance system is not very good in this country. So the true extent of monkeypox's spread is unknown. And we have the school year coming up very soon. One of the misconceptions about monkeypox has been that it is a sexually transmitted disease. That is not true. It is a disease that is transmitted through any kind of close contact, including simply hugging or not even touching another person, but wearing clothing or using the same bedding as somebody who is infected. Anyway, this has resulted in greater scrutiny and consideration of different vaccines. The standard vaccine for monkeypox is one called Jynneos, which is produced by only one pharmaceutical company in Denmark. And there isn't nearly enough to go around. And apparently the US has a pretty decent sized stockpile, but that stockpile is stored in bulk in Europe. And if it is to be distributed, then it needs to be packaged in the little glass vials. And that process will take months, many months. So that means that there really isn't much vaccine around. And this is an epidemic. It is growing. It is definitely growing much faster than any treatment or vaccination campaign can have any measurable effect at this point. So the state of California and the city of San Francisco are considering busting out a much older vaccine that was originally designed for smallpox, but is also effective against monkeypox. It's called ACAM 2000, and there are 100 million doses of this in the strategic national stockpile. There are 100 million doses there because of Saddam Hussein, interestingly. If you think back to the American invasion of Iraq, one of the justifications given was that Iraq was developing biological weapons, including smallpox, which turned out to be not true. And the CIA probably knew that it was not true. Nevertheless, it did prompt the production of all these doses for a smallpox vaccine. So we have them, and that's great. And so why not just vaccinate a big chunk of the population and call the situation done? Well, it's an attenuated live virus vaccine, and that means that it will have a much more potent effect on some people than maybe an mRNA vaccine like those for COVID. And in particular, people with eczema, which I don't usually think of as being, it's certainly a serious condition, but I don't think of it as being a lethal condition by any stretch. Apparently, people with eczema cannot take ACAM 2000 because it will kill them in many cases.
Wow.
Yeah, because it is a live attenuated vaccine.
Well, I think it's cowpox, the same stuff they used centuries ago.
That's exactly right. It's actually cowpox, which was exactly what they used 200 years ago to inoculate against smallpox. So it's a surprisingly primitive vaccine. If this epidemic goes on, well, I guess you could say technically it is a pandemic because it is global. There's epidemic spread globally.
Yeah.
If it continues on, then maybe other drug manufacturers can roll out vaccines, but that'll take a year at least.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like maybe you could use this stuff, but have screening criteria to avoid giving the wrong people doses.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they would absolutely need to do that. And it's not just people with eczema. Incidentally, it's people with compromised immune systems also.
Since it is a live
and
virus,
also small children.
Does it spread to people who didn't get the shot then?
Yes, that is another issue with it. Yes.
Well, then you can't stop it from getting to the people that shouldn't take it.
Well, that's a good point. Yes. I guess you'd have to look at the households, and if anybody in the household has a condition. Yeah.
Yeah, well, then you'd have to balance how many people you're going to kill with this vaccine compared to how many people monkeypox is going to kill.
Yeah, the anti-vaxxers would just love it if this ACAM 2000 were released. I'm sure.
And they would be right. I mean, you're doing something that has a downside.
Yeah.
So now you have to balance the two.
Yes. Although, to be clear, there are a number of very common live attenuated vaccines out there, like the standard measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine that's given to
Mhm.
every child in America. That is live attenuated.
I wonder how many people that kills.
Not many at all. Also, the flu vaccine, that's live attenuated. Most of them.
The thing that always gets me about the talk about vaccines is that even if the naysayers were right, which they are not, but even if they were, and those vaccines killed or caused major problems to children and or adults, the outcomes would still be better than getting some of these diseases like measles or, whatever. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, but you do have to balance it. You have to calculate which is better. All right. So Caitlin has got UK children on the far right.
yeah, so this is not just an American issue. Far right extremism is a global issue. And in the UK, they are discovering that their children are being targeted online. So The Guardian has an article written by, I'm going to say Guardian McGuardian Face. I don't see a name on this article anywhere. Anyway, so this article is talking about how kids in the UK are being ensnared in far-right ecosystems. And I'm sure you've heard of the term the alt-right pipeline. And that is what we've sort of, I guess, focused on here in the United States over the past few years about how people get radicalized into the alt-right or far-right. But of course, that's not just an American issue. There are neo-Nazis and white extremists and ideological extremists, right-wingers in the UK as well. And one of the tactics that right-wingers use is to go after children, which is very scummy. Like it's not just like they go after I should say they don't just go after children. They go after vulnerable populations. So, for example, they will go after quote unquote involuntary and celibate people, incels, because they're emotionally disturbed and they're easily manipulated. And the way it usually works is that they'll go into a community and then say things like, well, the reason why you're lonely and no one will love you is because of feminism, or because you're really supposed to be rich and wealthy and everything except all the undesirable races. They're doing this.
Right. Or affirmative action deprioritizes my college admission or my job getting.
Exactly. So they go into these communities where people are, going together for support, and they use that vulnerability to radicalize them. And that's the playbook. Now, of course, any sort of vulnerable population is vulnerable to this, especially children. And so there are far-right ecosystems online targeting children, in particular things like message boards for video games. For example, they'll get on there, or they'll make like Minecraft servers or Roblox servers to invite kids over and then slowly expose them to, far right-wing propaganda. And I really find this particularly troublesome, or I should say hypocritical, given the far right's talking points about LGBT issues recently. So the far right has gone full circle on LGBT issues, and they're saying any sort of pride and everything is quote unquote grooming children, which of course is absolutely not true. No LGBT person is grooming children in any way. It's saying you should be proud of who you are is not grooming children. Okay, let's just be honest. And yet I want to show you something here that is truly disturbing, and this is mainstream stuff. This is not some far right wing example of white nationalists. This is PragerU for kids. I kid you not.
Oh, no.
And the messaging on here is so bad. So here,
Sort of like PragerU for adults.
These are the same people accusing LGBT people of quote unquote grooming children, and they put out videos like this. And so this one is particularly bad. This one is called Leo and Layla's history adventures with Frederick Douglass, and basically they meet Frederick Douglass.
Hey Liz, can you turn off your camera so she has the full screen?
So they meet Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass tells them, oh, you shouldn't try to, like, slavery was bad, but it's important not to, rock the boat too much when trying to institute change, which is like the exact opposite of what Frederick Douglass would say. In fact, let me do the old trick of me putting my headphones up to the microphone, and so you can hear a little sample of what Frederick Douglass is going to say in this PragerU for Kids video.
To end it. But Leo is correct that big problems need to be approached very carefully. Have you kids heard of William Lloyd Garrison?
No. Nope.
He's an abolitionist like me, and he and I used to be friends, but we aren't any longer. We don't agree how to solve problems. William refuses all compromises, demands immediate change, and if he doesn't get what he wants, he likes to set things on fire.
Sounds familiar.
Sounds like you know the type.
Yeah, we've got that type in our time.
So the type they were talking about they were looking at Black Lives Matters protests. And they were talking to Frederick Douglass, who in this fictionalized universe would of course be all against Black Lives Matter, which of course is not ridiculous. So this is a good example of sort of subtle racism being directed towards kids in a mainstream video on YouTube, where they're trying to indoctrinate children into right-wing ideologies. And then we have this other video here, where the kids are very interested in power sources, and they're going to talk to an engineer about why wind and solar are just terrible, and we should just have nuclear power, because this is all what kids are into is, energy infrastructure. So we'll take a listen very quickly to this one.
I've read lots of books about different energy sources.
We need to know which energy source is the best so that Naya's life can be better.
Let's start by sorting the different ways to produce energy into two groups: reliable energy and unreliable energy.
One group already sounds bad. You've got to be able to count on things when they're needed. I don't like anything that's unreliable.
Reliable energy comes from coal, natural gas, and nuclear power plants. Each of these takes a natural resource from the earth and can create energy for people to use around the clock, year round. That's why we say they're reliable, because they can always be counted on. It's also nice that they're not too expensive.
So which energy sources are known as unreliable?
Those would be solar power from the sun and energy produced from windmills. They are unreliable because they only can make energy when nature cooperates.
There's no sunlight.
Yeah. So these are videos directed at children, trying to indoctrinate them into sort of standard Republican talking points. So, yep, this is the world we live in.
Truly inspiring stuff.
Yes.
All right. And so now we get the one that I thought was the most important in my look through. Pornhub has got child porn. Something like 20 or 30 people are suing, claiming that the pictures of them and videos of them while underage were used on Pornhub, and millions of people saw them. And Visa and MasterCard have been sucked into the lawsuit. A judge has declared that Visa and MasterCard are encouraging and participating in child pornography, and so they have ceased cooperating with Pornhub, making it possible for people to buy ads using Visa and MasterCard. So this seems like it's really going to rock the pornography industry, and I'm just amazed. I mean, if I was their lawyer, I would say, look, if you're going to be in the business of pornography, this is the #1 mission critical thing, is to keep the child pornography off of there. That'll be the end of everything. And man, looks like that has happened. So I think that'll affect internet business quite a lot. We'll see how this goes. Anyway, then we got Alan, who's got the DOJ using paper.
Oh, this is a really interesting story, and one that the Department of Justice seems to be keen to cover up a bit. It appears that the DOJ was hacked in 2020, and that, or I should say, there was, quote, an apparent compromise of the DOJ, specifically the electronic case files. And so these are the potentially very sensitive documents that pertain to cases that the Department of Justice is involved in. This breach happened sometime probably in the early 2020, but was not announced until January 6th of 2021. And I shouldn't say announced. It really only came up when Representative Gerald Nadler, a Democrat of New York, brought this up. And so he only learned about this in March of this year. So it's a very hush-hush situation. And the impact, the scope, these are all questions that are unknown at this time. But the DOJ certainly seems to be freaking out about it, because what they've done is they've switched to an all-paper system. They are no longer using their electronic case record system. They're just using 100% paper. So this is a story that's developing and needs to be tracked quite a lot more, because you hear about like various foreign governments getting hacked and then switching to typewriters and paper. But this is the first I've heard of a U.S. branch of the U.S. government getting hacked and switching to paper, and the Department of Justice of all places at that.
And there are data breach disclosure laws.
Yeah, and so I don't know if they actually disclosed this properly, or they did it in a hush-hush way that's borderline, or they did it improperly. But it is the Department of Justice, so they can kind of make up the rules as they go along, I guess.
Yeah, well,
They certainly have more lawyers than anybody else.
well, yeah. All right. And so Caitlin's got more white nationalism and violent young men.
Yeah, so let's go back to the United States, because we were just talking about UK children. But of course, there's a lot of white nationalism going on here in the United States still. So the conversation.com has an article, let's say, written by the Jonas Brothers, because the author right down here, Sophie Bjork James. Thank you, Sophie. So the conversation has this article talking about how social media, once again, is partially responsible for the rise of popularizing white nationalism. Let's put it that way. So like I said, like the far right groups have this pipeline going after vulnerable populations, but they also are very active in shifting the Overton window on social media. So they're constantly posting posts and encouraging others to, post things that are slightly more hateful and slightly more hateful, until finally we get things that are like, extremely hateful on social media. And then eventually, like, Twitter has to intervene and like ban people, and people are like, why? I didn't say anything that bad. Well, that's just because the Overton window has been shifted so much by these right-wing extremist groups. So you don't realize just how bad your post was. And this is not only just affecting online spaces. This is, of course, bleeding out into the real world, which is a large reason why we have the January 6th insurrection. White nationalist groups were a huge part of that, as it turns out, and as we're discovering in the hearings. So we have, there was a July 12th testimony from a former Oaths Keepers member who coordinated with the 3 Percenters, another, white nationalist group, along with the Proud Boys. And they all mobilized on January 6th. They were there. This was not just a bunch of Republican voters or Trumpists. White nationalists were there. And like I said, these people go after vulnerable populations, and they'll go after anyone they think that they can sway to their side. And so if you think about like the huge Trumpists, the people that are like in love with Trump, you don't get that way. You don't follow a leader like that if you are a perfectly stable, genius, as Trump would say. There's something going on where these people really need that. They really want Trump. There's something going on in their lives where they feel like this is filling a void. And so, like I said, these far right extremists will then go after them and mobilize them and force and try to shift them more to the right. And so when Trump did his thing on the Capitol, the white nationalists were there to take advantage of that and to play on these people and direct them towards their ultimate goal of turning the United States into a white ethno fascist. I don't even know what they want. I mean, they want to kick anyone that's not white out of the country. It's basically what they want to do, or at least keep them in their place.
Or Christian.
Yes.
And this is not a secret at all. You got Marjorie Taylor Greene and Shepak and Viktor Orban. They want to turn America into Hungary, where it is a monoculture.
Right.
And I've been sort of waiting for someone to ask them, how is it you plan to get rid of the Jews? Because apparently they do. And anyway, it's
right.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, so let's look at why do people join these groups? So data, I'm just going to quote the article here. Data from manifestos posted online by white nationalist groups shows that many of the mass shooters share a few common characteristics. They're young, white, male, and they spend significant time online at the same websites. So we know what the group is. We know what they're doing. We know how extremism is rising in the United States, and it's tied to a few websites, which is extremely concerning. And I don't know what we can do about this. I've always been a strong believer that if you own your own website, you can put whatever you want on it. Twitter is okie dokie with banning whoever they don't want, but if you go out and you buy your own server on the internet, it's your server, you can put whatever you want on it, and we can't stop people from posting terrible things on their own server. And of course that's where all the white nationalists are going to go congregate on these servers. So maybe just, and I'm probably not giving anyone any new ideas, but maybe just monitor these websites more closely. I don't know.
Well, they're not even individual servers. There's Gab and Parler and a bunch of websites just for this purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not happening in secret.
Yeah, it's definitely not happening in secret. And what's really concerning is that it used to be that, for example, punching Nazis was an unequivocal good guy move. Like this was what Indiana Jones would do. There was an episode of MacGyver where MacGyver would go and punch Nazis. That was an awesome episode. It was totally, oh my, so just on a side note, there's an episode of MacGyver where like these Nazis come and they try to like put MacGyver in a gas chamber and gas him. And that was a real episode that aired. Anyway, and he punched Nazis in it. So that was amazing. And it used to be a good thing. And nowadays, because of the shifting of the Overton window, white nationalists and Nazis are saying, oh no, you got to treat Nazism and white nationalism with respect. And you have this being repeated on mainstream media where they're like, don't punch Nazis. No, it's like, I don't care about Nazis. I don't care about their feelings.
Yeah.
Like let's not treat them, their ideology with any respect, because it's not worthy of any.
Yeah, but it's now essentially mainstream republicanism. I mean, they're not even hiding it much anymore at CPAC.
Unfortunately not. I mean, and that was the big thing about the modern Republican Party, is that it's not just, I mean, we can disagree about, like economic issues on anyone from the Democrats or the Republicans. But when you start going into xenophobia, racism, white nationalism, the conversation has to end. You just have to say, no, that's not an acceptable conversation point. And yet we have mainstream Republicans who I'm sure a lot of Republicans don't even want to be mainstream, but they are talking about far right, extremist ideologies, and they are elected officials. So
Marjorie Taylor Greene is the #1 fundraiser in the Republican Party.
yep,
Perhaps
and
after Donald Trump.
Yep, and I imagine the far right extremist groups that are organized and trying to get people into vulnerable people into their groups are the ones largely funding people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So
this stuff is still rising. It hasn't even begun to like turn the corner and go down yet. Anyway, all right. And so Apple, a bunch of women are complaining that they got sexually harassed and exploited and harmed at Apple. And when they went to HR, they just got stuff that sounds like it's from 50 years ago about you're just making it up, you're just making trouble. Why don't you just shut up? And then the women get punished and fired and the men left on the team. It's the worst sort of tech bro race sexism, which Apple would be proud to say they aren't like that, but apparently they really are like that. And so there's quite a lot of this hitting the public now. So that's pretty awful. And Alan has got people leaving Silicon Valley. Perhaps not for that reason, though.
Oh, well, no. The Wall Street Journal has a very lengthy article about the explosion in the number of American municipalities who are offering incentives to tech workers, American tech workers, to come and move to their little, in many cases, hamlets. And of course, leave behind the big city life of San Francisco and New York and so on and so forth. And apparently back in October, there were about 24 communities offering these incentive packages. Now that number has jumped up to 71, at least according to a company called Make My Move, which also, as it turns out, is a contractor to many of these communities in helping them implement these plans. But depending on the community, there are all kinds of different incentives that they are offering to tech workers who will be working remotely. Everything from free land to free childcare to cash payouts, essentially, for people who stay long enough. And the benefits can be pretty substantial, $10,000, $15,000, to say nothing of the ongoing childcare support and such. And it's unclear exactly how many tech workers have taken up these offers, but it's a non-negligible number at the same time too. And this article, of course, interviews some people who have moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they just love it there. They think it's a great community. And I'm not knocking Tulsa, Oklahoma, of course, but maybe it is a nice spot. But
well, I'm surprised they need to induce them, because I think most people that I hear about in San Francisco, they leave just because of the cost of living is lower, and you can afford a whole house in a town like that for what you get a small apartment for here.
It's so true. A lot of people don't need any inducement whatsoever. But my understanding is that people who are leaving San Francisco and other tech hubs, they're oftentimes going to outlying suburban communities, or they're going to what might be termed second tier tech hubs, like Austin, Texas, or Boise, Idaho, or even Portland. Some people may object to calling some of those locales second tier. They're getting to be first tier in some cases, but I think by and large, people are not moving to Muncie, Indiana, which is one of the communities, incidentally, that offers a relocation package. And it seems like there's a disproportionate number of these towns in Indiana and West Virginia and states in the South.
Well, there would be some culture shock, I think, if you moved from a big city to a place like that.
Yes. And so in this article, they interview a man who's moved with his family to Indiana, but then later on, it turns out that his wife is from Indiana and they moved close to her family. So they might have moved there anyway, but they just got an extra 15 grand out of it.
Yep.
But this is perhaps a growing trend. It's been talked about for a while. There are about 24 countries that have remote worker or digital nomad visas of one kind or another. But this is more of a newer phenomenon in the US. And what's interesting here is that companies, or rather communities and states, have for a long time been offering huge incentives for companies to relocate under the assumption that, you know, they'll generate a lot of jobs. In the case of, for example, the supposed Foxconn factory in Wisconsin that Trump was very excited about, it was a promised $10 billion investment. And of course, nothing came of that. It's just a cluster of buildings in the middle of nowhere. So a lot of these corporate or factory relocation incentive programs from states and communities have been duds. And it turned out to be extremely expensive to the taxpayers. So they're very risky. But if we live in a more remote age where people can work remotely and they've got good paying jobs, well, you don't have to go after the companies and the factories. Instead, you can go after the workers themselves. And the risks are much lower and the costs are much lower. You don't pay 15 grand to a relocating worker until they've stayed in the community for at least 1 year or what have you. So this could be more of a trend in the future. I'm wondering here is that because you have more people who are more mobile and can work remotely, and they are earning much better money than the average person is in that community, there will be considerable incentives for communities to try to recruit people. Whether or not they'll be successful, those communities will be successful, is an entirely different matter. But this might be indeed a part of a growing trend.
Oh, I think so. And I think this is one of the side benefits of COVID is so many people can now work remotely. We can finally do what they've been promising for decades, where you just move to a nice place to live and work remotely. You don't have to commute into work.
Yeah, and even in the tech industry, so few people were able to work remotely prior to the pandemic. It was just 5% or 2% or something like that. The companies are, I guess they're set in their ways, even startups and tech companies are. So it took the pandemic to prove that it is workable to have people working remotely and that they can work just as effectively remotely as if they were on site in an office building.
Yeah. Yep. One benefit of COVID, there aren't very many, but that's one of them.
Yes, for a few people, certainly a minority of the American workforce.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Tuesday.